There's a reason archaeologists still stop in their tracks when they uncover the remnants of an old Viking homestead. For all our modern insulation, fiberglass panels and engineered houses, the Vikings had already mastered a shelter design that kept families alive in the kind of cold that kills unprepared travellers in minutes. And, they did it without electricity, without foam boards, and without imported lumber. Their secret wasn't brute strength or advanced tools. It was a design so perfectly adapted to the Arctic and subarctic world that modern researchers have admitted it rivals and often outperforms modern insulation in extreme cold. For the next minute, stay with me, because when you hear how they engineered this system using earth, turf, airflow control and passive heating, you might never look at ancient technology the same way again. And if you're a survivalist, a homesteader, or someone who studies historical engineering, this is one trick from the past you'll want to steal. The first major insight into Viking Arctic survival is that their homes were not built on top of the land. They were built into the land. Instead of fighting the cold winds and the Arctic temperature swings, they ducked beneath them. Excavated longhouses in Iceland and Greenland show a pattern. A deep-set floor, often dug below ground level, surrounded by thick earth walls reinforced with stone. When you dig downward, the soil moderates temperature. Even in harsh climates, the earth a few feet down settles into a relatively stable thermal range. That meant a Viking home began with the foundation that nature itself preheated in winter and pre-cooled in summer. Modern survivalists mimic this by digging earth shelters or partially buried cabins because the physics is reliable. Someone wanting to apply this today could, dig a 1 to 2 metre trench foundation, line it with stone or compacted earth, and instantly benefit from the same thermal buffering the Vikings enjoyed. The next piece of Viking brilliance was the turf wall. A modern builder hears grass blocks and thinks instability or rot. A Viking builder heard turf and thought insulation, moisture regulation and fire resistance. Turf was cut in thick slabs, sometimes as much as a foot deep, and stacked like heavy bricks. Each slab contained soil, roots, compact layers of organic matter and trapped air pockets. Those air pockets are the real secret. In modern insulation, air gaps reduce heat transfer. The Vikings were doing the same thing using living earth. Turf walls routinely reach thicknesses of 1 to 2 metres. That's the equivalent of stacking, dozens of fiberglass bats. In practical terms, survivalists today can actually recreate this effect by building earthen berms around a small cabin, or constructing a turf wall against the windward side of a shelter. Even without traditional turf blocks, packing sod or earth against an exterior wall offers a temperature advantage that's measurable within just a few hours. A house loses most of its heat through its roof. The Vikings flipped this weakness into a strength by designing thick, layered, turf-covered roofs supported by sturdy timber frames. Archaeological reconstructions show multiple layers: wooden planks at the base, birch bark above that as a waterproof membrane, and finally dense turf laid on top. The weight compressed everything into a tight seal, and again the turf acted as powerful insulation. This roof didn't just trap heat, It also absorbed solar warmth during daylight, then slowly released it inward at night. In an Arctic winter, that slow passive release made the difference between constant risk of hypothermia and steady, livable conditions. Anyone building a modern off-grid shelter could apply this by layering roofing materials, a wooden or metal base layer, a moisture barrier, and then a thick, packed soil layer. It is heavy, yes, but the heat retention is unmatched. Another overlooked innovation is how Vikings managed airflow indoors. Their longhouses were heated primarily by a central hearth. There was no chimney, as we know it. Instead, the smoke filtered through the turf roof or escaped through a vent, creating a gentle layer of warm, trapped air. Smoke behaved like a primitive insulation system. The warm particles filled the upper part of the room, reducing heat loss through the roof and, warming the interior air more evenly. For survivalists, the takeaway isn't to fill your shelter with smoke, but rather to replicate the principle of controlled stratification. A small, efficiently ventilated fire pit or rocket stove inside a compact shelter can create a thermal gradient that honestly, dramatically cuts heat loss, especially if the roof has a low pitch and is well insulated. Inside these longhouses, every design choice was deliberate. Sleeping platforms were raised because, warm air rises. Animals were sometimes kept in adjacent sections, adding body heat to the structure. The long, narrow shape reduced the amount of interior space that actually needed heating. For someone applying this knowledge today, the practical advice is simple, really. Keep the shelter compact, sleep elevated off the ground, and use interior partitions to reduce heat loss. Even hanging thick blankets or hides can, emulate the Viking technique of dividing living zones. The real reason Viking Arctic homes outperform many modern insulated houses isn't magic. It's the fact that, modern homes are built to fight nature, while Viking homes were built to cooperate with it. Modern buildings, you see, sit on top of the land and rely on mechanical heating systems to compensate for poor thermal mass. Viking homes, on the other hand, embraced the land, used materials with enormous thermal inertia, and treated insulation as a system rather than just a single layer. When all those elements worked together, earth walls, turf roofs, controlled airflow, compact layouts, the result was a shelter that honestly held warmth for astonishingly long periods with only minimal fuel. This knowledge is, frankly, incredibly useful for anyone studying historical engineering planning, off-grid living, or preparing for extreme cold survival. If you wanted to replicate the system, you could begin with a partly dug shelter, surround it with earth berms, layer the roof with bark and soil, and design the interior to conserve every bit of heat you generate. If you found this guide valuable and want more deep dives into ancient technologies that still outperform modern systems, make sure you subscribe, share this video, and, keep exploring with us on In the Beginning.